Thank you, Presiding Officer. It has already been said this afternoon, but I think it bears constant repetition, that Scotland this year has the opportunity, a choice of two futures, between two very different directions of travel. On the one hand, we are already the fourth most unequal country in the developed world, and the present Westminster administration promises to take us further down that road of inequality under Osborne's austerity Britain. On the other hand, independence offers us the powers to develop further our steps towards universalism, greater equality, a better future for our children. A future that might look like that enjoyed by the children in Holland, Norway, Sweden and Denmark, as highlighted by my colleagues Christina McKelvey and Stuart Maxwell this afternoon. Scotland is a rich country, and our children should be sharing in that wealth. And it's worth reminding ourselves what the present levels of inequality mean. I thought that Labour might talk about their successes in terms of tackling child poverty, and I wasn't disappointed this afternoon. But UNICEF produced a report in 2007 which put together 40 indicators of child well-being in rich countries. It concluded that while children in Britain fared less well than in any other country, those in the United States hardly did better. Improvements in child well-being in rich societies will depend more on reductions in inequality than on further economic growth. This 2000 UNICEF report card provided a comprehensive assessment of the lives and well-being of children and young people in 21 nations of the industrialised world. Specifically, it attempted to measure and compare child well-being under 6 different headings of material well-being, health and safety, education, peer and family relationships, behaviour and risks, and young people's own subjective sense of well-being. And all it drew on 40 separate indicators of children's lives. And the United Kingdom found themselves in the bottom third of the rankings for 5 of the 6 dimensions reviewed. This is simply not good enough for Scotland's children. I was also surprised, perhaps, to hear the claims that somehow the SNP had come late to this debate and that this was something that the First Minister himself had not had a handle on in the past. Although I expect that maybe it's because Labour don't want to remember some of the other things that they did while in government, because in March 2007, Gordon Brown delivered one of the harshest blows to the most vulnerable families, to women in part-time work, in low incomes, when Gordon Brown scrapped the 10p tax rate, shifting the tax burden to the lower paid. This caused misery for low-paid workers, many of whom were women in part-time jobs. And Alex Salmond immediately, on that day of that budget, called this a tax con and highlighted how damaging it would be to women and low-paid workers. George Adam this afternoon asked us to remember that when we talk about poverty and inequality, we have to remember that these are the lives of real children. And in 2013, Save the Children produced a briefing on the consequences for children growing up in poverty in Scotland. It highlighted that they missed out on things that many other children took for granted, that they had to cut back on food. 14% of children living in poverty said they lacked a warm winter coat. 19% of children living in poverty said they were missing out on going on school trips. They were more than twice as likely as their better-off peers to suffer developmental difficulties as they reached school age. They were less likely to reach their potential at school. By 3 years old, children from deprived backgrounds are already 9 months behind the average development of school readiness. By primary 7, the gap in reading attainment levels between pupils living in poverty and their peers is 22%, and the attainment gap in maths is 15%. And Save the Children also talked about the health inequalities for children in poor families. Children living in low-income households are nearly 3 times more likely to suffer mental health problems. And ill health during childhood has long-term consequences. As we know, a child born in Lenzie, North, a more affluent area of Glasgow, can expect to live 28 years longer than a child born in the Carlton. So poverty has a real detrimental effect that is lifelong for our Scotland's children. Not at the moment, sorry. That's why I'm delighted that the Government has announced today that primary 1 to 3 families will receive, children will receive free school meals, a saving of, on average, £330 per child for hard-working Scottish families. And what we know is that this will be welcomed by the Scottish Free School Meals campaign, which includes organisations like the EIS, like Shelter Scotland and Children First. Because in their briefing for this debate, they talked about how important universal benefits and universal services were. And I think we only need to look to the Jimmy Reid Foundation's case for universalism to understand how important this is when they say, of all the available data is pulled together and the conclusions drawn, the historical and contemporary evidence strongly suggests that the appropriate response to austerity is to increase universal provision and so stimulate economic activity, equalising damaging wealth disparity and improve both government and wider economic efficiency. I wish the Labour Party were on the same page as the EIS, Children First and the Jimmy Reid Foundation in this debate.